Welcome back. I just have another partner in crime.
I'm new here.
And your name is?
My name is Peter. I work together with Hassan and a lot of the other guys that's been on stage, but I'm actually part of a different team, a slightly different team. So my main focus is actually the infrastructure side. So I'm more of a do the things they say, protect against this, protect against that, do this, do that. Then I'm the guy to actually implement all of the changes they recommend.
Wonderful.
Yeah, let's get started.
He's the doer.
I'm the doer.
Okay. You've heard this before. Marcus at least mentioned the assume breach mentality that we should have nowadays. What it is all about is very easy. We assume the worst and we work it out from there. And very limited trust in everything surrounding us. So the admin machines might be hacked, will probably be hacked in a targeted attack. The different services might and will probably be hacked if we have breaches, vulnerabilities. It's made by man, broken by man type of theory, right? There's always something, oh, I didn't think about that. So let's get it going from there. So assume the worst, work it out from there, and then very limited trust in everything. But we still need to make it work, right? So I guess that's the biggest challenge. Back to this, we're going to look more at the network segmentation. We're looking more at the privilege model. We dig through the identity in the previous session, so we had all of that. So what are we trying to do? What are we trying to accomplish? Obviously, we can offer a whole different sets. I mean, we saw the different things we can configure for protecting our identities, but that's not enough. If somebody is controlling the machine I'm running that identity on top of, they will be able to do whatever I'm able to do. So we're not speaking about pass the hash, pass the ticket anymore. If they simply control that machine, and I'm running processes that can control any sort of system, they can just be part of that process and control the same system the same way. As a matter of fact, it's just a matter of sitting there waiting and learning how I do things, and they will mimic that behavior. Whenever I'm there logged in, whenever I'm there having a privileged session towards any sort of systems, they will be there doing the same thing as well. So first and foremost, isolating those very sensitive systems is something we should really consider working with. The attackers should never have the ability to control that machine I'm exposing the domain admin on. If that machine is not reachable, unless they are standing in front of it, maybe threatening me to perform a logon or something like that, I don't know, they shouldn't be able to control. Why should they be able to reach that machine over the network? Why should they be able to establish a remote session to that machine, RDP or command prompt or whatever, over the network to such an important machine? And it's not just only the domain admin, right? It's everything. I mean, you work with System Center, obviously. And if somebody controls that, then
it's game over. We have local system access to almost all the systems. And if we manage servers as well, which I see a lot of companies do, we have full server access to everything as a local system. So securing your management products becomes equally as important as securing your actual systems. But your management product is also a tool to help you, which means instead of doing everything on site, on the server, remote desktoping everywhere, you can actually use your management tool and take a step back, securing your management tool, and then using that to make changes to your environment. So it's all about isolation and how you manage your systems.
So, I mean, at the long term of this, it says, okay, you're the guy managing the virtualization platform in this organization. If somebody controls your workstation, they will be able to manage all virtual machines in this organization. So your machine and your account is not just, oh, I'm just the one managing the virtualization platform. I'm not the domain admin. No, you might not be the domain admin right now. But because we have a virtual machine running as a domain controller, you are a domain admin if you want to. Just dump that memory, extract those credentials, start using pass-the-hash, or just jump into that machine, attach yourself to those processes of interest, and then you own it all. You have access to the file system, etc. So we have a lot of pieces to work with. The isolation is not on the network level. The isolation should be on all different levels, all different tiers. Network is one tier of these. Management is another one. Other type of control tiers are to be considered as well. So to start from somewhere.
Let's start at the beginning.
Yeah. So what is this all about? I mean, it all starts from the physical hardware, right? I have to have a machine running things on top of. I have to have an operating system installed on this. So how do we secure that presence? How do we secure that environment? Obviously, UEFI, SecureBoot are components to look at and configure properly.
Yeah.
How about is it easy to go from classic BIOS systems to secure boot systems?
There, okay? Right now, it's kind of a hassle. It's still being quite of a hassle to move from the legacy BIOS to the UEFI since they changed the partition tables. Legacy BIOS uses MBR partitions, and the new UEFI uses GPT partition tables, which means you have to kind of reformat the drives. However, with Windows 10, 1703, and forward, there's now a tool to switch your partitions over while running. So you can actually switch to partition, reboot, switch to UEFI, and then continue running. So it's getting there. It's getting much, much easier to move from legacy to UEFI.
And the same thing should be applied to virtual machines as well. This is not just about physical machines. We should consider servers running virtually in our platform for the same thing, because most of these security features we're talking about require SecureBoot. If you don't have it there, you will not be able to implement it properly. So we have to go back and look at our virtual machines. The virtualization platform should support this. We need to be able to utilize SecureBoot, UEFI-based or firmware-based protection for our systems. Another very important component when speaking about firmware UEFI, it's very, very important to look at the update process involved in updating your firmware. Is it possible to just take any binary and double-click and update the firmware in your machine? What about digital signing? What about trusted sources? What about who can change your firmware? Because whomever can change the firmware, they will be controlling your machine. That's the new way of controlling systems, is to control the firmware. Because if I'm the firmware, I can tell the operating system everything is fine. And there is no way to figure out whether this is true or not. Well, there is. Sort of. If we go ahead and continue elaborating on this, we need to have a trustworthy hardware. We need to be able to tell or pinpoint and point at specific pieces of our security architecture in the hardware. Say, hey, can you please tell me the truth about these things going on here? So somewhere we need to have that point of trust. And that one has become TPM.
TPM, yeah.
So TPM is the device in our hardware that can tell us, hey, you know what? Somebody clicked that on button on this machine, and ever since that, I've been observing what's going on. So this is what I've seen. So I can ask TPM, hey, can you just tell me what you've observed since power was turned on for this machine till now? So it will tell every single step, every handover from firmware to boot managers to kernel device drivers, device driver loading, anti-malware components, etc. And all of that will be perfectly visible in my system. So let me just give you that small insight. Let's see, is there a logon screen somewhere? There we go. By the way, never run as admin when you run your regular day-by-day tasks. It's a whole lot of things. Okay, so this is the log from my TPM chip about what my machine has been doing ever since I switched it on. So it's telling, okay, these things looks like that. This is the checksum for the firmware. This is the blog. This is how it's signed. This is the signer information, etc. So I see every single aspect, every single detail about what this system has been doing. This includes loading different sets of device drivers, different sets of applications, etc., depending on how much of the device guard component we've enabled, and so forth. So I see, okay, this machine is obviously capable of doing network boot, PXE-based boot, and that's that component that's responsible for that one. And it just goes on and on. Management systems can acquire that log and have a decision point made based on that log and the content of that log, just to tell, hey, this machine looks fine. It's according to our policies, it's according to our rules, or no, there's something fishy going on in this machine. So,
and at a basic level, I'm assuming some of you who run hardware encryption on your devices, such as BitLocker. And if you enable BitLocker, even in the basic mode, when you just go through group policy, you can check all the PCR settings, which is visible through this log, saying, hey, check this value, check this value, check this value. And if any of those changes, BitLocker will flag out and go, hey, this device has been tampered with. So BitLocker just goes from being an encryption to a protection to protect your device from tampering as well. And a lot of the third-party vendors don't do that because they have no way of interacting with those values. So it's a very nice way of using the TPM and tools you already have within the Microsoft platform to get that additional security you need.
So the credential guard we talked about in the last session, it actually monitors that state and says if something happens with the SecureBoot, which is now monitored by the TPM, then I will go and flash all the credentials that are in the profile. Easy. So things goes in hand. So these three things together, that's what the definition of the, not just the secure boot, but we start speaking about the trusted boot platform. We can speak about this is trustworthy. We can verify that. And the main difference here when you start speaking TPM, which version should we rely on? So this is all supported by, I mean, the SecureBoot, the different guard functions are supported if you have version 1.2 of your TPM implemented. But to get to this level, you have to step it up to version 2.0. Version 2.0 is the only one that gives something we call TPM attestation information. So TPM attestation is simply about the TPM chip has a key pair. This is an onboard identity every TPM 2.0 has. It's a built-in key pair on that TPM chip. Whenever you ask it to do something, it will sign all the responses with its own private key. This way, I can actually go back all the way to identify a particular physical chip in my platform. So I can start whitelisting TPM chips in my systems. So unless you're running that particular device, you will not have access to that system. Once again, back to the silo thinking structure. And this time we are not just relating to identities in Active Directory based on username and passwords, we're actually relating to physical components on our machines. And the same model is applicable if we look at virtual machines. with Hyper-V and other type of virtualization platforms, there is a virtual TPM concept that utilizes the same type of measures. Okay? This is just a sample of all the different features that relies on TPM and the combination of TPM and SecureBoot in this. I guess the next big thing we're going to see happening, Microsoft has started this, the secure firmware update process, which is if you're running a Surface machine, then Microsoft is taking care about that because it's coming with the Windows update. Everything is signed perfectly and should work according to the rules. Now the turn has come to the other vendors. We're speaking about HP, we're speaking about Lenovo, Dell, etc. No matter the brand, they have to conduct the same type of measures. They have to supply the same type of secure firmware update mechanism. And that's where we can start getting to this, okay, I know that the firmware is trustworthy, I can go forward from there and start looking at other things. And obviously the first thing, yeah, we touched bases with this in last session. This is the device guard. So the device guard is the basic component, right? Yeah. This is where the compartment virtualization-based security starts. And on top of that, we have the credential guard we demoed.
Yeah. And one of the things that with credential guard as well as device guard is that Microsoft has made this a lot easier to implement. One of the things they've done is actually switch how this is administrated. So you can use group policy and enable this policy. And depending on what you set in here, you get either device guard with code integrity, or you could get credential guard or both. Let's see if my domain controller wants to play. So if we just look at this. So here you can see I've enabled credential guard here. I have not enabled code integrity. But here you can turn this on. By doing so, and you have Windows 10, 1607 or newer, everything is just going to be automatic for the end user. It's going to turn on Hyper-V, all the features needed. It's going to configure everything for the end user. They never have to do anything to do this. But you talked about something last session with Credential Guard. Credential Guard can be in a lot of states. And this is turning it on and configuring it. But you need to monitor Credential Guard or Device Guard to make sure that it's configured, but also running. And if I look at my machine, you can see that I'm running Credential Guard. This means the information about the state of Credential Guard or Device Guard components is available to the machine. So if we use a tool like System Center Configuration Manager together with Powershell, we can monitor these three settings. These are WMI classes. They're available on the PC once you turn on Device Guard. And there's a corresponding TechNet article describing which value is for which setting, if you have code integrity, credential guard, and so on running. This means I can use this tool to get those values from each specific machines and put them into a compliance state, saying if it's turned on, it's compliant. If it's running, it's compliant. And if any machine flags out of order, I can have remediation done. That means I can flag them back on, or I can just give a list to help desk, say, these machines are non-compliant. Someone needs to take a look at these because they are in a state that's bad for us. How do we fix this? This is something most companies tend to forget. It's all nice and new shiny features, but if you don't monitor it, it's basically useless.
Yeah. And monitoring and looking for compliance and making sure that everything is running, this is what we refer to as device health attestation. So if you start monitoring these things, you are giving yourself the ability to start looking at or telling, oh, this device, the health status of this device, because Device Guard is considered to be, if the device is running Device Guard and Credential Guard, then we consider it healthy. This should be let to be act as part of our operating systems in that environment, part of our Active Directory, etc. So we can start elaborate on that one and use that within Active Directory, as a matter of fact. So if the device reports itself to be compliant with our rules and policies, we can tell Active Directory, hey, this device is trustworthy till that degree. You can allow it to access this or that system. The same discussion we had about the authentication mechanism assurance with a dynamic group membership going on at the time of logon is actually applied to device logon. So in Active Directory 2016, devices will be performing smart card logon to Active Directory with or without different sets of policies on their certificates that will give them certain levels of trustworthiness in Active Directory and in different systems I'm accessing. So this is all part of the dynamic access control or the conditional-based access model. For the device health attestation, particularly speaking, you have to have TPM 2.0 because we simply require a TPM must sign that information we are building this use case with. If you don't have a TPM 2.0, we don't have that possible attestation model going on. We cannot identify the hardware behind, and we cannot go forward. So that's as good as the currently used network admission controls and network access control system, which is an agent stating something. We cannot verify that to some trusting point other than this is just a piece of software. It can be controlled by an attacker. Good. So next thing in this model about or discussion about isolation is obviously the networking. Network segmentation in general, micro-segmentation maybe particular, is of great interest. So if I can limit the attacker's access to other systems, it doesn't matter if these systems has a vulnerability or not. It doesn't matter if they do share the same password with other systems. If you don't have network access to that system, it doesn't matter. I can have the same username and password across multiple systems. Now, that's not a good practice, so don't blame it on me. But if you happen to have that, and if every machine has a firewall enabled and not letting anybody access SMB resources or any resources at all that accepts that username and password, it's not an issue that you have a shared common password across your machines. Just trying to give you some relationships between different things. So let's take the WannaCry. So if every single Windows XP machine out there, unpatched because there wasn't a patch, had a firewall, nobody could consume that vulnerability. It's as simple as that. And WannaCry wouldn't be that type of success it became. So as easy as that, just the presence of the firewall and the configuration of the firewall, obviously. Clients doesn't need to communicate to other clients because clients shouldn't offer services to other clients, I guess. We have servers for that.
We have servers for that, yes.
Well, there is a limited peer-to-peer functionality, like if you're running Skype or something like that, it still needs to have, for performance reasons, some peer-to-peer communication, but that can be managed in the firewall, right?
Yeah.
An exception rule allowing Skype EXE to communicate with other Skype EXE on the platform. So let's have a quick look at that, just demonstrating the firewall or the effect of the firewall if it is properly configured. This is SRv3. I'm using the remote desktop client. These are two different clients running on my machine. Obviously, these clients are running with different identities, as you see here. One of them is running with the administrator account. This is domain admin, as a matter of fact, and the other one is running with the Hussein user account and the domain. One of them can connect, and the other one will never be able to connect to that remoting system. Same machine, same IP address, same destination, both cases. I'm getting the explicit credential prompt in one case and getting a timeout in the other case. This is simply because it says, hey, I couldn't reach that service. So this is as if the other party is not there. It's not even on the network. It's not responding on that port. If I go check what's going on with SRv4 I'm trying to communicate to, This is all because of this rule. This is the remote desktop connection. This is what allows remote desktop to be accepted on this machine. Firewall is obviously on. I have an inbound rule. And this rule says I allow this traffic only if it is secure. The if it is secure is an indication that there has been an IPsec-based handshake going on. So we are distributing identities. We are settling that down. We know who's communicating with who, on behalf of who, etc. All the identities involved in the communication, both domain, user identities, and machine identities are settled. Now, I let this go to, or be able to communicate with 3389, which is the classic port for RDP. Besides that, I have an explicit requirement that says only the assigned user will be able to connect to that port. So if you're that particular user, it doesn't matter where you're coming from. Scope-wise, IP address-wise, I don't bother about that. Any IP addresses are welcome. If you can demonstrate that you are that user logged in on any of our domain machines, we will let you communicate with that particular port. Now, this is dynamic. As said, doesn't matter about IP addresses or whatever machine you're using this from. I can go further and say, hey, this is only available if you're running from that particular machine, let's say SRv2. So I'm putting a combination, says that user on that machine is a go, otherwise nothing would be allowed. Once again, I can give those credentials to anybody and say, hey, you will not be able to access those services because all of the admin interfaces on those services allowing this user to access requires specific machines as a starting point. Now, this is the firewall. This is for the network access to start with. We're not speaking of anything about the RDP configuration in here. So now I said SRv2 is the only source that is accepted. Let's go back to SRv3 and try this again. So this time, none of these will manage to communicate with the RDP service on the other side because this is not SRv2. We might call this micro-segmentation. This is a dynamic segmentation done by the built-in firewall. We don't need to have any additional extra things going on. We don't need to have any other products. This is all built in the Windows platform. It doesn't cost you any additional licenses, anything at all. This has been there, as a matter of fact, since the release of Windows 2000 almost, 2003. It's been enhanced throughout the different releases. So this way of very granular, particular decision points being made has been there in the platform since the release of 2008. And we need to start considering these things, start using these things. Now, a big question used to arise here says, hey, what about management of these rules? Yeah. So, okay, should I do that using group policies, system center? Are there tools to be used here? What are the tools, etc.? I used to have two different answers. One of them is that, how often do you change your servers? Can you tell me that? Okay, this is a SQL server. You installed it today. It's going to be run as a SQL server for the next, what, 4, 5, 6 years? Okay, and you change that? Not that very often, right? So let's configure the firewall once and just make sure to monitor it's configured and on. So we should have a baseline to monitor. Okay. The other answer used to be, okay, well, I love tools. I have to have a tool. There are tools out there. Speak to our friends at AdLevel. They have a tool called AIM, AdLevel Isolation Management, which will give you the ability to define fine-grained policies for every single machine in your environment. Or if you love the group policy management, that's another option.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a quick demo about the ability to start working with dynamic network segmentation. And if everybody is very picky about the type of traffic they are receiving on their machines, even though we have such vulnerabilities like it's possible to conduct lateral movement because of shared passwords, shared admin accounts, etc., it won't be possible. If the machines are not there listening for your connections, you won't be able to use those credentials you just harvested from somewhere. You need to use other tools, and that's another obstacle we are adding in front of you. Good. Next thing. This is where your thing starts to pop up.
Yeah, my things.
So once again, back to this, how do we manage systems?
Well, we basically have 4 ways today. You either use remote management tools. Those have been around for years. You know, the MMC snap-ins, the fun things that crashes all the time. Those are actually good tools. They don't perform the normal logins, which means you don't leave behind credentials everywhere. So you can still use that one box to manage your systems and still make sure that one is secure instead of all of your systems. We have the classical one remote desktops, which is the one that most people use, which is probably the worst option. Then we have Powershell. Powershell is the new way to manage everything, okay? But this only works if you actually upgrade all your servers and clients. I still have customers who are running 2008 R2, and they go, hey, but those have PowerShell. Yeah, but you didn't upgrade PowerShell, so we don't have full support for everything we need to do. You need to make sure you update Windows Management Framework as part of your patching process. And if we look forward a bit, just a tiny bit, Windows Server 2016 has been out for a year now, or almost a year. And just recently at Ignite, they officially showed Project Honolulu, scrapping all the old tools, all the old stuff, and basically showing you nice, new, shiny dashboards with PowerShell behind the scenes. It is a very nice way to do things, and it is a central management tool instead of all the old stuff. But it is still in preview.
So the characteristics for the Project Honolulu is that you have a single machine or maybe very few machines that have the ability to run PowerShell remoting towards other machines in the platform. It will be consolidating and saving that information locally and showing you that as part of that different dashboards you have access to. So it's kind of a tool server or a delegated PowerShell remote
Management server.
Yeah.
And then we have the agent-based systems, whether they be Configuration Manager, Tivoli, or whatever you want to use. And they're good at different things. I'm not going to bash
once again,
too much.
The different aspects here are, okay, if somebody get access to this tool, this particular way, how much access do they have to the rest of the environment? Obviously, if they get hold of a management system like System Center,
it could be the end of the world, or it could
pretty
be
much so. Okay, but if they just get access to one single tool running on the desktop, okay, then that's user with the user permission, whatever that's applicable, then we have access to those machines. Remote desktop, if we're running as admin, that might be a worst case, or is a worst case in many scenarios, especially if we're local admins on that system, and then we are exposing things way too much. So let's, just to tie this together with the other things you've been observing and watching earlier today with the other sessions, there's something called the living of the land. So use the built-in tools to leverage whatever you want to leverage. Attackers are very much into that. Use the built-in tools. PowerShell is extremely popular because we never had any more powerful tool in the platform before. Well, the .NET platform, obviously per se, but to utilize the .NET platform, you need to have other tools. Now, PowerShell is one of these tools. So you have access to all different aspects to Windows, including very fluent, extensible system. So you can extend that in many different ways. So fewer artifacts, not that very much visible when I do. Just use the built-in tools, blending in. Okay, this is just another admin running PowerShell. Well, what do we know about that? And making life much difficult for those observing and trying to discover what's going on. So we need to understand those things. So one thing we can work with is that, okay, we need to maybe start restricting PowerShell. A very classic type of oh, bad guys are using PowerShell, we remove PowerShell exe from our machines.
Okay.
Just delete that file. Wait a minute. PowerShell is a management system built into your Windows, okay? Windows internally relies on that to do things. If you remove PowerShell exe, PowerShell is still there. PowerShell exe is just a console. That's one host possible to instantiate. You can instantiate a PowerShell host many different other ways, okay? It's still an attack vector. The PowerShell exe per se is an attack vector. So attackers are using that, utilizing things that runs through the PowerShell console, different users clicking documents with macros, etc., being instructed to run this and that. So the console is an attack vector, and then we have different sets of protections available. So let's just take some of these. So starting with the execution policy, this is not a protection. I have it there just to tell you this is not a protection, so forget about that. If you have an execution policy, it's not going to protect you because it's bypassable. It's just a flag when you start your PowerShell exe. So just remove that from your protections or list of protections. We do have the anti-malware scan interface that was introduced in, actually with the PowerShell version 5.0, right? So we're not speaking about Windows anymore. We're speaking about PowerShell, and PowerShell 5.0 is the built-in in Windows 10. Actually 5.1 nowadays. So if you upgrade your PowerShell, install 5.1, then you will have that AMSI interface included, which is PowerShell will communicate with your AV and give it the script you want it to run or the instructions you want it to run. And it will await a response from the AV or AM component. If it says OK, then it's OK. If it says no, then it's no. It's not going to execute. As simple as that. There has been a bypass possible. That bypass has been fixed in 5.1. There was a DLL thingy you could do to bypass that.
There's also a small thing to note here. We talk about PowerShell 5, right? And we talk about how it integrates with your whatever anti-malware solution you're running. But that's only true if the anti-malware solution you're running is actually certified for Windows 10.
It's offering that interface, right?
Otherwise, yeah, otherwise it doesn't have that interface, so you don't have that capability. So it's important to pick a solution that also supports the platform you're actually running on. Just keep that in mind, because I've seen that go waywards a couple of times.
It's good, it's good. And parallel with that, if you still have PowerShell 2.0 enabled on your machines, you're toasted. Just remember that. So PowerShell 5.0, very nice. We do have these nice features available, but remember to remove the PowerShell 2.0 because that's a different component. Just because you had 5.0, 5.1, it doesn't mean you don't have 2.0. 2.0 is a feature on its own and has to be removed from your systems. So just remember to do that, because the attackers will go back to the 2.0 because it doesn't offer these capabilities. And then we're back to starting point again. Okie doke. Next in line is the running the PowerShell in constrained language mode, which is very interesting. The constrained language mode is not about limiting the capabilities of PowerShell as such. So you can still define functions, you can still define things, but it more limits the extended language feature, which is having access to the .NET platform, for instance, is such an extended feature in PowerShell. So by running in constrained mode, you can still run with whatever PowerShell is including for you, but you cannot extend the language. You cannot add .NET classes as you go. So that will limit the attacker's ability to use PowerShell as a successful tool to conduct their attacks. And how do we do that? Well, it's possible to do with different methods, different ways. One way I particularly like is to, let me see here, just get rid of that one, is to actually use Applocker, which is using another feature we're going to speak about, just to turn PowerShell into a restricted language mode. This is just a PowerShell session I started on my machine. If I check the language mode the PowerShell is running on right now. It says constrained language mode. If you check this on anything else in the Windows platform, let me just check that server and then run PowerShell. Let me see, it's execution context session state. So this says full language because there are no rules to enforce that restriction. So this is what you have on your regular machines. If you don't have these rules, whomever starts PowerShell will always be in full language mode, which means they can use whatever they want in terms of extending the core components of PowerShell. So let me just give you an example here. I do have a script here. Oops, it's not Notepad. Sorry. There we go. This is a very small script. Anybody understands .NET? Okay. If I try to run this on the command prompt that says, hey, you're trying to do something, well, you're trying to use the .NET platform, right? And it's not allowed in this language mode. You're not allowed to do so. But if I run the whitelisted script, it will calculate the square root of p without question, because that's a whitelisted script. And in this case, the whitelisting is very simple. I'm not doing anything strange at all. Let me just see, go back here. Just look at the Applocker policy I have in behind. So this is actually enforced by Applocker, application control policies locally in my machine. And I just have a script rule that says, hey, all the scripts in the no-scan folder are allowed to run. This doesn't mean you're not allowed to run anything else. But if you happen to run a script from somewhere else in the system or work directly in the PowerShell prompt, you will end up in being in constrained language mode. This is a very special type of whitelisting. When you just whitelist PowerShell scripts, everything whitelisted will have full fluent ability to run everything in PowerShell. If it is not, then we are limited. We can still run, but in limited mode. So this is something to recommend you guys to run with. So use Applocker to perform this type of restrictions. It doesn't harm. I know that I can identify all the scripts run by the operating system by, for instance, digital signatures. I can put a publisher rule that covers all of that. And then otherwise, if I assign my own scripts, I can give them full fluent ability to run PowerShell the way they like. Except for that, they will end up in restricted mode. So this will take away all the classic tools running through PowerShell, like Mimikatz, variations, et cetera, et cetera. Everything run this through PowerShell, then you will be fully invisible. Well, if it is using just the built-in things, fine. If not, that will be blocked. Another thing we can do here for the PowerShell, or restricting the PowerShell, is working with the just enough administration capability of PowerShell. So this is something that has been introduced just to address these concerns about if you have ability to do PowerShell remoting on a machine, this simply means you're an admin on that machine, right? Or you probably have to be admin on that machine, otherwise you won't be able to remotely manage the machine. That has always been the case, or is the case, actually. Unless you start defining your own so-called PowerShell endpoints or configuration endpoints. And when you start defining those configuration endpoints, you will have the ability to tell, hey, I have a bunch of regular user accounts here, and I want to give them the ability to perform these particular commands or commandlets or functions or et cetera in a PowerShell remoting session on that machine. Some of these things might require local admin privs, but you're fixing that for me. And the way PowerShell fixes that is by introducing the virtual account concept. So I connect to a PowerShell remoting session. I'm allowed to do restart service, which normally requires local admin privs, unless I go and start doing a delegation within, which I don't really want to do. That's too much of the good things. So I would prefer to, OK, this is a regular user. He or she belongs to DBA admin group, let's say. They need to restart that SQL service from time to time. What if I can offer them the ability to connect to that remoting endpoint and restart that service without being local admins? And whatever is required to restart the service, the PowerShell runtime on that machine will make it possible for them. So it will actually instantiate a virtual user account and run that access with that virtual user account to settle those requirements. Let's give you a quick demo about that. Enter PS session. Many of you guys have been doing this, I guess. Localhost, and then I will do that with a specific configuration name called GIA. So if you don't specify the configuration name, it will connect to the default configuration name, which is the Windows PowerShell. That one requires admin privs normally. This one doesn't. OK, I'm into that remoting session. If I just do get command, this is all I can do in that session. OK, you see I can do got hotfix. I can do got local group, process, and I can restart the computer or stop a process. This is not everything PowerShell can offer me, right? But in that context, in that session, this is the subset of functions available for me. And we can configure this dynamically with modules and module definitions on every host, every machine we have. We can push those modules to settle different types of requirements for different roles in our environment, et cetera. So let's look. I just did that as a regular user, right? If I go and look at what's going on in my system, let's see here. So in the program data, I have the GIA configuration. And I have a special kind of logging called transcription logs. This is a transcript logging in PowerShell that is enabled on this endpoint. So if I just look at the recent one down here, the one I just describes the things I've been doing right now. So it says Windows PowerShell starts the transcript login. Start time is this. The local user Hotline Security was logged in, and everything, all the different actions performed are run by this virtual user. And that virtual user is given local admin privs if necessary. Once again, I'm accessing the system. I'm doing things on that system without the need to expose my real admin privs or credentials on that system. It's substituted with the local account. So whomever controls that thing, they can't get away with my real account to control other systems. And besides that, OK, he or she did get command. And by the way, they got these results. So all of that is, OK, so that was the output. So this is as if you were sitting at that prompt. You will see all the input, all the output on that particular shell. So this is the just enough administration capability of PowerShell. So using PowerShell remoting, please consider using the just enough administration.
Yeah, it's a nice feature.
Jumping to the next thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We've been already speaking about the remote credential guard and the restricted admin mode. So another thing that is very interesting is the remote desktop gateway, which Peter will.
Which we'll talk about. Which the thing is, when we come to customers, a lot of the issues is jumping. We see a lot of jumping, okay? So you connect to server 1, and then from server 1, you connect to server 2 or 3 or 4, which could be a problem. Imagine for a second the scenario you have an external consultant connecting to your system, and you give him privileges on your server. He needs that to do his daily work. But for some reason, he also managed to get privileges to another box. And now he can, all of a sudden, he can jump from the server inside your network to another box, getting more privileges, better understanding of how your environment works, and so on. By using the remote desktop gateway, you can limit that access. And using this in combination with what Hassan showed you earlier with the firewall, saying you can only connect from these endpoints, meaning they will only allow connections from the remote desktop gateway. So you always have to pass through that. Remote desktop gateway is a part of Windows Server. It's been around since 2008, I think. And it works by creating policies. So we give it a name. And then we add requirements. Okay. So to connect to this, you need to be a member of the Secure Admins group. But we talked about isolation, right? So I want to make sure they're also connecting from those specific workstations that we've designed as secure workstations. So only specific users from specific workstations may connect, whatever the server is. We can tell it to, no, you may not redirect all your devices. So you cannot bring in clipboard, you cannot bring in printers and whatnot. We can define timeouts, saying, if you're not active, we're going to throw you out. That means these people can access. And now we tell them, if you're a member of the secure admins, we need to add a security group. We can tell them what group of servers or devices do we want them to be able to reach. That means we can define for this set of consultants, for these types of users, they can only reach these 4 or 5 or 10 servers. And that's a hard definition. But now it's centrally managed, not on each endpoint. The only definition on each endpoint is whether they accept a connection from the remote desktop gateway or not. And you can even define what ports are available. So by using this, together with the firewall, together with remote credential guard, you get a very, very secure system where there's no jumping, no sidestepping. And the guys in the front row here goes, crap.
So this is basically a good substitution for these tool servers, jump station, jump host, whatever you guys call them. Instead of having a regular Windows machine, I jump there and establish a Windows session. And then from there run RDP again. This is a proxy for RDP. So I define who can do what, who can access to what RDP service are out there. The other benefit of this is the monitoring part, right?
Yeah, and here's one part. You get monitoring in here, so you can see actual connections to actual servers real time. But that also means you get extensive logging into the event log. So you can see who connected where and when, and if that connection was allowed or denied. So all of a sudden you have centralized logging capabilities for remote desktop, which I highly doubt most of you in here have today.
Good. So just another one to add to the giving ourselves the ability to detect things going on.
Detect things and prevent things as well.
Unexpected behaviors, etc. Somebody's trying to reach to something they shouldn't be on. Etc. Okay, we already touched bases with the Applocker. I'm going to show you application inventory visibility. You can define Applocker whitelisting policies for applications at runtime. It's recommended to run that in audit mode, especially speaking on servers. You will get very nice visibility as this one, like, okay, GP update was allowed to run, but according to the rules, it shouldn't be. So this is a good one to catch all these odd behaviors. Okay, somebody did double-click something on the desktop on that server. Somebody did double-click something in the internet temporary files, or it ran automatically or something like that. I want to see that. That's adding to the ability to see things. besides the protection against like the PowerShell constraint mode, etc. So that's the other part of the Applocker. So please start considering using Applocker. As a matter of fact, Microsoft today recommends running Applocker in enforcement mode on domain controllers. Only allow software signed by Microsoft to run on a domain controller, which includes the PSXX. So I need to make sure I do exclude that guy. Why are you looking at him? OK. And then finally, we want just to share an idea with you. It's like, OK, it can actually be as simple as this. Let me just say, OK, when we manage our servers and devices, we need just to establish a rule base. It could be fairly easy. So primarily, we want to rely on remote tools, network logon type 3, because this way we're not exposing any credentials the wrong way. It's all kept in our starting point, and that's, if we keep that starting point well protected, then we're all safe. Secondly, maybe we need to run something interactively, and that's the remote desktop gateway, the RDP, either through the remote desktop gateway or not, but with the remote guard and restricted admin mode, wherever applicable. In the second place, log on locally, but not with your domain credentials. Log on locally with the locally admin managed password, the lapsed password. We're not exposing anything of value to the attacker controlling that machine, once again. And absolutely forbidden, never to be allowed, is introducing a domain account without protection into that session. These are fairly simple rules. It's a whole lot of behavioral change. This is not how we work today. So we need to work on that piece, and that's probably the hardest thing to work at. Convince everybody to run with these very simple, but still very demanding rules.
Yeah.
OK. Things to look at, just extend your views. The Windows Defender ATP, which is now supporting Windows Server operating systems, including Windows Server 2016 and 2012 R2. Nice thing to if anybody wants to know more about that, shoot a question after the session. Shielded VMs, which is actually TPM SecureBoot, encrypting the hard drives on the fly, encrypting the memory on the fly for VMs. So even a malicious Hyper-V admin can be kept out of this without leaving traces, without being visible. Sneaking around and trying to have a look at the memory in those machines. Very nice feature. And then if you're into the remote desktop gateway, there is a combination with the Microsoft MFA, the Azure MFA, to be looked at, just to enable MFA whenever you utilize the remote desktop gateway. I guess that's it.
That's it for us.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you very much.